It feels like almost every popular song that drops nowadays is a remix of an older song. And as a listener, it becomes very boring to listen to some of these songs because even if you look at every rap song that went number one in 2022, you have First Class by Jack Harlow, you have Super Freaky Girl by Nicki Minaj, you have Jimmy Cooks by Drake, you have Wait For You by Future, and all four of these songs have one thing in common. All of them feature a vocal sample, and they're heavily implemented into these songs. And what's very interesting is that, with the exception of Jimmy Cooks, they all feel like a song we've already heard before.
And that's facts. Yeah, if you actually dive into it, it's pretty scary because you're starting to realize how this is becoming more and more of a tactic. And it's kind of always been a thing, like just a disclaimer, like we're obviously not the first people to discover this. It's kind of attention grabbing, especially for 2022, because as you said, the only 4 songs that went number 1 on the Hot 100 in hip hop had those vocal samples in it. And 3 of them were actually older remakes. Wait For You, I believe that sample was from 2020. But let's actually dive into this. So why do these songs actually sound the same? So if you go to a 2015 study that was done by scientists at the University of Vienna, they found out that, if you were to compare the genre sales to music sonic components such as timbre, acoustic variations, and more, they found that as the genre increases in popularity, they also become more generic. And as of 2017, hip hop became the most popular genre in the United States. And I feel like we're watching it in front of our eyes right now, where there are certain hip hop components, example like sampling, that I've loved for such a long time. I mean, it's a big component of rap music. I'm such a fan of the pioneers like Madlib, like DJ Premier, the gurus that were able to get it done. But now I feel like it feels forced.
That's a different type of sampling. And what's interesting too is that now record labels can minimize their financial risk because they know more than ever what's going to sell. And there's actually ways and tools that they have that can actually guarantee them to a certain degree if a song is going to hit or not. For example, tools such as Shazam, tools such as Hit Predictor, also the good old-fashioned self-inflicted leak where you leak a song to kind of check out the temperature, see if a particular sound or style is going to land and reach the masses. And I find this super interesting because if you look at a song like First Class, for example, Jack Harlow was very clever because he knows how important the first 30 seconds of a song are, right? Especially in the streaming era where 25% of people skip within the first 5 seconds of a song. What he managed to do was put Fergie's chorus from her hit song Glamorous as the first 40 seconds of First Class. And what we ended up seeing was that after First Class came out, there was a 53% increase in streams for Fergie's song Glamorous. And what's interesting about that is that usually when a song features a sample, it's so perfectly woven in that you won't even think about, oh shit, this is a blatant sample. But clearly this stat shows us that there was a nostalgia component. People were like, oh, fuck, I know Glamorous. I bumped this as a child.
Absolutely. And I think that, of course, it's genius for the marketing, right? Because you could say that a lot of maybe, creators right now are trying to find a new lane to be able to strive in, but now it's like the era of Renaissance. Let's go back. Let's take things that were popping off back then and let's put a new modern twist on it. Then no blaming Jack Harlow, no blaming Drake, no blaming Nicki, no blaming Future. I mean, this has always been a part of the game, but now it's almost becoming like kind of a low-key hack, where, okay, let me take something that's been popping off and let's implement it back into society and make sure that, okay, it sounds good and revamped. And I want to ask you something, and, this is also for the comment section. How do you feel about that as a consumer? Because, as I mentioned before, I'm a fan of sampling. I think a lot of you are as well. But for you, Lou, you're hearing a lot of these songs. Obviously, we're not the biggest fans of mainstream, crazy number 1 hits, but I do enjoy them from time to time, but I just can't find that same enjoyment now in 2022.
Listen, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, sampling has been a part, especially of hip-hop, forever. I mean, that's kind of how the genre was created, as producers and DJs would chop up samples of songs from other genres. But now it's to a point where it's not just a bass line or a key section from an old song that's being implemented into a new song. Now you're getting, at times, the entire instrumental, the entire chorus, and even the same lyrics repeated to the point where it feels like a fucking copy and paste. And this has kind of been the case for songs like Big Latto's Energy. You also have Jack Harlow's First Class. You have Lil TJ's In My Head. You have Sleepy Hollow's Scrub. That, of course, samples No Scrubs from TLC. So there's a lot of songs within this modern era that are doing this tactic, but I feel like there's also other problems that are kind of leading to all of these songs sounding the same. I feel like one major thing is just the length of these songs. A lot of them, if you're looking at songs, let's say like Old Town Road by Lil Nas X, clocks in at like 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
If you actually go through a Spotify catalog, it's very hard to find a song over there that's over 3 minutes long. And there's obviously people that like to make music in a different way. We say it all the time, how we enjoy short track lists, but it's when they pack a punch and not when it feels like filler. And I'm not saying Lil Nas X has filler music. I'm just saying that you definitely understand the marketability behind a lot of these tracks. And what's interesting is that this is actually, this is a statistic that talks about the most successful songs on the Hot 100 or in music as a general. And this comes from TrackLib. Let me
I think it was actually a stat about albums, right?
I think. Hold on a second. It was for the samples that were implemented into some of the highest charting pieces of material into the thing. So do you have the stat in front of you? I just got lost in the notes
according
here.
to TrackLib, over the last 5 years, all of the chart-topping albums on the Billboard 200 chart, over 50% of those chart-topping albums featured samples, and this definitely shows an increase over the years that more and more artists are sampling songs from previous generations, even songs that are only 10 to 15 years old, and it's becoming a real tactic. But I feel like, let me ask you this, do you feel like the actual problem is a bit deeper? Because when I'm listening to a lot of these songs, I feel like certain artists are kind of scoping out the rest of the industry and kind of trying to just replicate an old hit song. For example, like Joey Badass's The Revenge. When you compare that to a song like Middle Child by J. Cole, it really seems like Joey tried to go for that pop attempt by having the same triumphant horns, by having that same comeback essence to his cadence.
And I get that, and I think that there's a lot of obviously copy pasting going on, and I don't want to say copy pasting, just more like how to steal like a good artist, right? Because if you go into like study of creativity and how it actually comes through, I mean, everything comes from inspiration from a certain point. So like maybe for Joey, it was like, okay, that probably worked well for him. Let me see if that's going to work well for me. Obviously, the fan base didn't receive it the way J. Cole's did, but still he ended up having a phenomenal album in 2022. But I want to talk about this more and more. Do you feel like now in 2022 we're getting cheaper hits? So obviously hits, radio optimization, streaming, whatever you want to say, digital marketing components has always changed the format of music, and you've had to, optimize your art for that. And people say, hey, you're sacrificing your artistic integrity to be able to reach that. So how do you feel about that contrast? Do you feel like you were getting better hits back then in comparison to now?
Absolutely. I want to kind of do a comparison of songs that are, let's say, roughly 10 years old compared to the new hits of today. I feel like a lot of the songs that were coming out in, let's say, the early 2010s decade, they were using sampling in a much more creative way. And I feel like those songs stood on their own 2 feet as compositions, even though they use samples. And a good example is Eminem's No Love featuring Lil Wayne. Of course, that song samples the classic dance club song, which is called What Is Love by Hathaway. And yes, there's a heavy use of it, from the production all the way up to Hathaway's chorus being implemented throughout that song. But what's genius is that Eminem changes the entire feeling and mood of that song, and he turns a love song that's about, unrequited love into a song that's actually about standing up to your opponents and standing up to people that bully you. And I found that was genius because he's adding a specific lyrical prowess to that song, and it doesn't feel like a love club song anymore. Yet a song like Way Too Sexy has the same elements like a song like I'm Too Sexy.
Yeah, but you see, I don't like that compare and contrast because, like, if you look at something like No Love and something like Way Too Sexy, I think they're different for what they meant for those track
What
lists.
I'm trying to say is that
one was a pop attempt and one was meant,
even down to the subject matter. I feel like a song like Way Too Sexy, same meaning and subject matter as a song like I'm Too Sexy. You look at No Love versus What Is Love, two totally different songs and what they're representing. But are there any other kind of hit songs, let's say, from the early 2010s that you feel like you sampling in a better way than a lot of hits today?
I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head. You'd have to probably go through the charts and, through the Hot 100s for those respective weeks and those respective years. But what I feel like is getting pretty cheap, at least for this year, is that I think that, when you take a pop attempt and you want to sample it for whatever purpose it is, obviously it could be done in a good way. But what a lot of producers are doing is they'll just take that sample and they'll obviously add certain effects to it to make it sound like, okay, I don't know, different than the original in a certain type of way, but they'll just slap on trap drums, bro. They'll put in certain elements that necessarily kind of cheapen the feel of that sort of music. And, as a music listener myself, I was saying this before, yes, I love my niche stuff. Yes, I like things that are going to be able to make my rotation that I appreciate, but now it feels like I'm not really getting anything more. So where do you think we go from here? Like, what do you think the next question is for artists to be able to innovate these big hits that are landing and being able to move in a different direction at the same time?
I think the whole art of sampling is making new listeners rediscover hidden gems. But like we're saying, I mean, when you look at some of these biggest hits, songs like I Like It by Cardi B, she's sampling the song I Like It Like That, which was a huge hit from the 60s. And I feel like that's the problem. Maybe try to sample songs that are a bit more niche, or if you want to sample these hit songs, use only certain elements that won't make it feel like a fucking do-over. Because even if you're looking at a song like Fellas in Paris from Jay-Z and Kanye West, they had the fucking genius outside the box idea to actually sample dialogue from the movie Blades of Glory. Like, to me, when I think of a hit song and the ballsy move to take dialogue from a film, that's way more creative than just taking the chorus of a song that was fucking popping back in 2007.
Yeah, but I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here. Not everyone has a Kanye West in their corner, making them crazy production and sample flips, right? Like,
but you need a Kanye West to inspire that next generation. Like, they should be looking back at what he did and maybe try to trailblaze the same way that he did.
And
that's kind of my argument.
Just to make this a bit more positive and actually talk about some good songs that dropped in 2022 that have good samples, I want to talk about Jimmy Cooks, because I feel like that was a great version of a hit song. Like, I'll go back to that track.
That's the difference, though. They didn't sample a huge song. It was a Play a Fly song, you know what I mean? That was kind of popular in the underground southern hip-hop scene, but it wasn't massive. Right?
Yeah, and I get that, but I mean, it was just well implemented. Like,
yeah.
Okay, fuck the song even being massive, right? Like, if you implement it well into your song, then it's gonna come out great. But what was nice about Jimmy Cooks is that it went number one, but you had a fantastic verse from Drake, and then after that, you got a great second part from 21 Savage, where the whole atmosphere completely dipped and got darker for 21's part. And you also start to see now that people want to hear more, I guess, rap hits from Drake at this point in comparison to the rest of his material, because even looking at something like Jimmy Cooks out of the rest of that album, that was the highest charting song, it was the most commercially successful, and it's the one that's living the longest at the moment.
People are hungry for that kind of Drake.
Exactly. So I want to talk to you about Drake, because he's obviously the biggest hit maker within our genre. He's the one that's carrying this shit, and he will probably, he's probably going to do so for the next decade at this point.
And he's had two songs that kind of frustrated me in the terms and the context of this conversation in the last 2 years, with something like Way Too Sexy or something like Staying Alive from DJ Khaled, where they just took the title and the chorus from the Bee Gees song and did their own version of it. Another example that I want to bring in too is Wait For You by Future, where again, that song starts off with Thames' chorus, and then Thames' harmonizing is present throughout both Drake's and Future's parts throughout the entire song. And then it's like, when I listen to Thames' songs Higher off of her 2020 EP, I'm like, this is so much better.
It is so much better. And you know what the problem with that song is, too, is that wasn't well implemented, because I wanted to hear Drake and Future's verses. I was down, but it low-key takes away from it sometimes, too, because, obviously, like, these samples are going to be blasted up and they're going to be super prominent within the song, but I feel like a lot of the times, too, it kind of strips away the capability of the artist. Like, if it's not well implemented, how are you going to be able to actually enjoy Drake or Future's part on there in its fullest effect? Yes, okay, maybe obviously you sample her voice for the chorus, or maybe some deeper background vocals that are not as prominent in comparison to the tracks that Drake and Future are laying down, but in that instance I feel like it was kind of misused. But regardless of that, I also think that, I mean, they're all laughing on us for
of course they are,
sakes,
bro.
Because that's the funny part, is that we could complain as much as we want, and obviously, our opinions are opinions. But if you look at this, these records are still striving,
bro,
and they're hitting.
They're doing their job. At the end of the day, obviously, music comes from a place of inspiration. It comes from a place of personal integrity, but the music industry is a business, and they're doing their job. They're getting these records to fucking sell, and that's kind of what matters to a certain extent. But for the fans, it kind of does become frustrating, because I also feel like a lot of songs nowadays, in terms of the sonics, a lot of them are mid-tempo. A lot of them infuse pop and rap together. A lot of them have these very safe vocals that are smooth, but don't really take too many risks. And I also feel like the drum patterns, either you have a hard-hitting snare pattern or an 808 pattern that gets kind of recycled song after song. And let me ask you this too. Do you feel like more artists should be creative in terms of their actual songwriting? Because I feel like so many songs nowadays go with that concept of love, in terms of heartbreak, in terms of trying to smash 100 baddies. Like I feel like it's always centered around that same theme.
Because it's the relatability factor. Like what else are you gonna talk about? You know, you're not gonna start talking about how like Samuel de Champlain took over Quebec in like fucking 1608 in your content matter. You know, like it's just not gonna work. So
no, but there's other areas to go into.
It's obviously not gonna work.
That whole thing about relatability kind of brings me to my next point that I wanted to ask you about, and that's just about like, how much of a part do we play into this? As consumers, are we to blame? Because humans love familiarity, and there's been multiple psychological studies that show that people will choose to listen to songs they're familiar with over new songs that closely match their apparent music taste. And I find that super interesting because I feel like it's true. At the end of the day, I mean, yes, I always wanted to discover new music, but I have my albums that kind of bring me comfort. And I feel
absolutely, but I mean, like you could find comfort in things that have initially made you uncomfortable. You know, like example, there's albums that I really didn't enjoy off of first listen because whatever the case may be, I wasn't hip to it off of first listen. But as I got more comfortable with the album, I started to enjoy it more and more. So I think that, yes, obviously going to your comfort zones in music could, you know, be a safe or dangerous bet depending on where you want to take your music listening experience. But for a lot of people, I feel like, you know, take the risks on your music listening because you're going to find yourself also diving into more mainstream shit when you want to go through it. There's a nice balance in between, you know, finding the stuff that's super popular and super comfortable and finding stuff that's going to take you out of your comfort zone.
The thing is that what happens once the record labels and the artists unlock the main comfort zone of a lot of listeners, I feel like that's when they can start manipulating.
I have a take on this.
That's when they can start manipulating and kind of capitalizing off of our cravings as listeners.
I know,
you know
but
what I mean?
Like we're also a different type of music listener. Like not everyone is listening to every single release every Friday, Saturday, making sure they're getting it. Not everyone has a music podcast, you know? Like the reason why I think that we're a bit more frustrated about the topic is just because of how much we listen to. But example, for someone like my mother, you know, loves the radio, she'll listen to the radio kind of senselessly in a way where like, okay, you know, it's those catchy, you know, catchy tunes, but like she doesn't realize that she maybe heard that song 30 years ago and maybe it's just playing in her subconscious now, and maybe, you know, she just locked into the radio and they got, you know, maybe 15 minutes more of her time where they could place ads and commercial space on there. So that's why I think that, okay, from a business standpoint and a marketing standpoint, it's looking a bit cool, you know? Like, it's just, they're going to do what they're going to do. I mean, it's corporate shit. You can't really stop any of that. But from, you know, I think from a standpoint where I'm at, I like to at least expand my horizons because it's very easy to get caught into that loop of listening to comfortable music and you become bored at a certain point. It sucks the life out of listening to music, and why would you want the life sucked out of music? It literally gives you life and more energy and, you know, more inspiration as you go through. So that's kind of my tactic with it. How about you? How do you feel about that?
I think that, I mean, yes, we do have a part to play, but at the end of the day, a lot of this music gets kind of forced onto us in the sense that it comes down to a case of exposure. When you're hearing the same song over and over on the radio, when Rap Caviar's playlist has this song within the first few selections, it's almost like you can't escape this fucking music.
But brother,
so it's like
the good part is that, like, you know, don't be that person that hooks onto the radio every 50 seconds.
I'm not that guy.
I know, but that's what I'm trying to say. So you're in the safe zone.
Bro,
you know,
like, I feel like a lot of kids, even in high school, like, their friends are probably bumping it in the car.
I bless my cousins out. I bless my little cousins out. I literally try to get
put them on game,
No,
man.
absolutely. Why? You know, because even when we were coming up in high school, we liked popular songs. Let's not run away from that fact. You know, we weren't always listening to fucking Mad Villainy and like
songs.
Undone, you know?
There's nothing wrong with popular songs.
There
it's
isn't.
just lately they don't seem to be as good and as quality. But guys, let us know down in the comments, what do you think about the current hits of today? Do you think they could be improved? How do you feel about this new trend of samples being infused into hip-hop and other genres? Let us know down in the comments, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next one.